One thing we've seen quite a bit is the 90-day intro period or the 90-day probationary period. And the question was brought, what do you think about them? What about at will employment? And really, what's the purpose of a 90-day probation period? Summer, as our consulting practice manager who recently brought on more team members, and our team members manage hiring and onboarding for our teams. I'll let you get first crack at this. Give your thoughts on the 90-day probation period.
Oh man. Well, it's funny that this topic came up because I have a pretty firm opinion of them personally, but I find that that's typically quite different than others. And, that's the nature of our work, that like we may have a personal opinion, but our role is to help businesses and leaders implement the processes that they believe are going to be best for their organization. So I need to give kind of the reason why I feel so strongly against calling something an intro or a probationary period. So I'm just going to put that out there. It's primarily because I'm in California, which is an at-will state, probably on the extreme end of at will if there was a spectrum. And I say that, kind of just, I'll start our conversation, Joey, by saying I definitely see that they are useful. I think that they work well in some organizations when they're used properly, and perhaps we'll talk about that. But I think that there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to them, and that's kind of what I talk our clients through if they either have one or are considering it. So for me, I typically recommend against them specifically for California employers and others if they're willing to do without. One, because I think as a new team member, I can look at it a couple of different ways. I can look at it like, okay, I've got to really bust my buns for the first 90 days, and hopefully I'll be good enough. And then I spend the next 90 days stressed out about whether I'm going to do enough in 90 days, then really spending that energy in a better place.
Yeah, and what about then the other side of that is, hey, I just need to make it to 90 days and then I can
Right.
coast, right?
And I mean, that's the problem with it, right? In absence of this concept of 90 days, then I believe the expectation is, hey, like we understand there's going to be a ramp up period. We understand that, it's going to take time to be more efficient and have a depth of understanding. But, if we are continuing to define what these steps, what these goals are, and then share feedback as to are we being successful or do we have more that we need to work on to get to where we need to be. I mean, ultimately, that's the goal, whether it's in 90 days or less or more. So I do feel like putting it, like making it very time bound, to me feels problematic for more reasons than it's beneficial.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the time bound nature of an evaluation period, but what I would look for is the language and the framing around it. And so instead of saying it's a probation period, it's a intro period. How about just reframing it as a coaching period or an orientation period or a inclusion period where you take someone who may have their own work experience and background, and you're bringing them into the organization so that they get to know the keys to success at your firm. Some people may need only 20 days to get up and running and feel acclimated. Some people might need 180 days to get acclimated. That's a episode for another time about like, when do you fire? But the truth is, it's so important to just be intentional about ensuring the person is successfully brought on into the organization and that they successfully have the tools they need to succeed in your organization. And it's not, about firing necessarily, but it's more about how can we set this person up to win. And I'm assuming that you've had a pretty good recruiting process, but even that can be disappointing sometimes. there's a stat that says 60% of turnover happens in the first 90 days. So we're not all getting it right. We're not all perfect. I was gonna say a crapshoot, but it is left up to chance sometimes, chance and opportunity. So that's my thought. It's less about emphasizing, probation, and more about bringing someone into the fold and making sure they're set up for success.
Yeah, I think just I think the term probationary period to me just feels very wrong. I agree. There's other terms,
How am I already in trouble just by joining the job?
right? Um,
Like, we're hiring you, but you're on probation.
and I think I talk about kind of my personal struggle with this is I think really seeing how they are administered in organizations. It is typically not ideal. I guess that's kind of where kind of my frustration with it comes into. And I'll give you some examples, Joey. Organizations who maybe have implemented a process that on the 89th day, they're taking a hard look at like, well, should we fire this person today or are they good? Like, that's really not what the intent of this is. Or looking at it from an angle of, well, like we're not going to really do our due diligence like we should during the hiring, like the interview process, the hiring process. If they don't work out, like we'll just fire them in the first 90 days.
Oh no.
Right. So it's like,
Right.
well, we got a probationary period. Doesn't really matter. And I'm like, hold on, time out. Like, this is not what this is like, it's not intended to be a band-aid.
Hmm.
Um, and, just the concept of at will employment, I talked about that a little at the very beginning of this segment. And, the idea of at will employment being that it's for, no determined amount of time. I do think that some employees here 90-day intro period. And even though they're at will, even though it's made very clear in many other ways, there is this misunderstanding that they get at least 90 days to show their employer what they can do, and that's just not the case.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. There's no well. So imagine an organization that has this probationary period, and then someone's let go, but maybe there's like a default like severance amount, right, that everyone
Hmm.
gets. Well, someone can show up, work for 3 weeks, quit, and then get the severance.
Hmm.
Um, and in California, if you give leave up front and then they work for 2, 3 weeks or whatever, that counts as earned income. And so companies sometimes feel like they can afford the turnover, but if you really stopped and looked at what it all adds up to from a dollars and cents perspective, from a morale perspective, from a churn perspective, and having to, do the onboarding processes all over again, it can add up. It can add up. So so yeah, what else you got? Any other thoughts you want to talk about with regard to probations and 90-day periods?
Yeah, there's two things, and I want to make sure that I'll try to talk about them quickly in the interest of time. One is a common question about like, can we have a different performance improvement process during our probationary period versus outside of it? Like, do we, if somebody's on the job 30 days and very clearly oversold their skills, is a really strong mismatch for the position, like, do we still need to go through our traditional process? And my answer is always, well, it depends. Because if it's so apparent that this individual, despite any coaching, any development, like PIP, will not be able to meet the minimum requirements for the job, then no, like, I don't think it's necessary. Like, if you're in that intro period and it's very clear that there's no opportunity for them to get on track, then yes, let's part ways.
Yeah,
But I think, beyond that, again, kind of going back to kind of this impression of what the 90-day period can give the employees, like once they pass it, they're good. I do think if they've made it that far and their performance is starting to suffer, then assuming that it's not, kind of that prior issue of still like such a drastic disconnect, then yes, we should be putting them on a performance improvement plan. If they've made it that far, then committing to a little additional time shouldn't be an issue. And I think aside from that, it's really just looking at what are the alternatives for these. And I'm a believer that, if you're a company who's comfortable going without this concept of a 90-day probationary period, make it a 30, 60, 90-day check-in. So it's less of this probationary period and it's more of those coaching sessions like you spoke about, Joey. And I think that's a much better approach that's going to have a very different effect, and like just general perception on the process as a whole.
Just like most things here on the show, it all leads back to culture and the climate that you're creating in your organization, whether it's one of fear or one of stability and progress and giving people the opportunity to learn and grow. So, really great discussion. I feel like this episode and last week's episode go hand in hand because we were really in our it's performance season, so
It is.
we're doing our own performance management here at the firm, and what better time to talk about our reflections and thoughts on the show when we're like actively in it.